Hello, I'm Janine Seitetsu Larsen, Senior Dharma teacher with Empty Moon Zen Sanghas and resident priest with Bright Cloud Zen practice groups of Seattle and Woodinville, Washington. This talk was originally given on March 19th, 2021, on the first full day of our Empty Moon Zen spring session. Zen retreats like this, even on Zoom, and no matter if they are one day, all or part of a week, or much longer, offer a great opportunity to deepen practice. So thank you for making this investment in your practice and supporting the rest of us and the Mahasangha of all who practice this ephemeral existence we call life. Along with sitting practice and meditation in its many forms, Zen also embraces the irrational practice of koan introspection. Koans have a unique way of opening us to the deeper experience of this thing known as Zen, which is nothing more than engaging honestly and without inhibition in the great matter of life and death. And because we are human, we tend to try to control and constrain the definition and function of koans. We create koan curricula, for example, such as our own sincere adoption of the Harada Yasutani koan curriculum. Some passionate koan practitioners have such devout reverence for koan study that they hold to a rigid orthodoxy about what is a valid koan and what is not, recognizing only the cases of ancient tradition and lineage given and guided only by authorized and revered koan teachers. And there is, of course, great wisdom in working with an authentic and skilled koan master to guide and offer correction to koan introspection. While direct experience is rightly emphasized in our Zen tradition, I think that with few exceptions, and it's safe to say none of us here qualifies, the Zen student who is completely self-referential as a fool for a teacher. Yet koans, these small and powerful pointers to immediate and continually unfolding enlightenment, are all around us, always tapping us on the shoulder or waving wildly in the corner of our eye, and sometimes bonking us fiercely over the head. Still, we often remain completely oblivious to these everyday invitations. Our Bright Cloud Zen practice groups have a practice of engaging a book study as part of our 2-hour Tuesday and Friday practice periods. Our current book is the Book of Householder Koans, subtitled Waking Up in the Land of Attachments, by respected Zen teachers and legit koan masters Yves Mion and Marco Roshi and Wendy A. Gyoku Nakao Roshi. I recommend it to you wholeheartedly. We have found it revelatory. Our own guiding teacher, James Myo-un Ford, has to say in his review of the book, "The only real Zen is the Zen of our actual lived lives. Zen's koans are stories that take us to where we really live, that show us who we are when we let go of the false stories we've been trapped within. The collections of these true stories, which open our hearts, started in China, and China gave us many that we cherish to this day. Others come from Korea and Vietnam and Japan, and now in the Book of Householder Koans, we are given a selection collected from 4 Western countries by 2 preeminent American Zen masters. And this is real Zen. These are the true stories of who we have always been from before the creation of the stars and the planets. This is Zen, made out of our bones and marrow, our tears and laughter. This amazing book is one of a handful written in this time that will be recalled as classics of our way. If you've never practiced Zen, read this book. If Zen has been your way for 40 years or more, read this book. It opens our way and reminds us of where to find it. The Book of Householder Koans is a direct pointing to our heart's longing. True stories. So for this morning's talk, I'd like to share the final koan presentation in the book and let the co-authors provide the Dharma talk. This chapter is titled Nomita Sees the Ancestors, and it begins on page 260 for those who have the book handy and would like to follow along. In the style of traditional koan presentation, this chapter, like all in the book, begins with an introductory verse, and then the koan or case itself, and then the teacher's reflection on the koan. It finally closes with pointed questions to consider and sit with. So, here is the verse. Before you were born, before your parents were born, what do you call it? And the koan. When Nomita was visiting her sister at the hospital, she passed a stranger in the hospital corridor and saw a long column of his ancestors walking behind him. Oh, she whispered to herself, each of us is a combination of our ancestors. Throughout the day, whenever she looked at people, she saw their ancestors walking in an endless column behind them. And the reflection from the authors. Zen Master Guishan once told a student, I, an old monk, will be reborn as a water buffalo in the front house of the temple 100 years hence, and 5 words will be on the buffalo's side, Monk Guishan, such and such. If you call this water buffalo Monk Guishan, it is still a water buffalo. If you call it a water buffalo, it is still Monk Guishan, such and such. Tell me, what do you call it? Indeed, what do you call this life of complete connection? When my sister, brother, and I are talking around the kitchen table, says the author, I am struck by how alike we are in our mannerisms and tone of voice. Our viewpoints, habits, and inclinations are unique to each of us, but there is an unmistakable commonality. I recall being amused when another sister of mine would complain about our mother because my sister's mannerisms, her tone of voice, rhythm of speech, and gestures were exactly like those of our mother. But could she see that? The Zen tradition is steeped in stories about the Zen ancestors. Each one is my ancestor, I was told. Each one took up a vow to wake up to the great matter of birth and death and to keep the awakened life alive. In Zen koan training, you learn to play freely with the ancestors by closing the gap between yourself and Master Guishan, for example. Right here, right now, the communal feast of ancestors is in full swing. They are all here in your very body, chopping carrots, sweeping the floor, and tapping on the computer keys. The life of complete connection invites you to swallow the whole messy lot of ancestors in one gulp. For example, when the Southern white journalist Karen Brannon delved into her ancestors, she discovered that within her biracial family, a white ancestor had lynched a black ancestor. So tell me, what have you actually inherited? When my Dharma sister Jishu died, I asked myself, what happens now to her vow to serve the children of the impoverished? She had worked night and day to establish a child care center that would include children of all races and income levels. Then I got it. You pick up the vow. You and I inherit the ancestors' passion, caring, and selfless capacity to serve others. We inherit the capacity to respond to our own lives with compassion, clarity, and intimacy. We inherit the potential to realize who we really are. When Nomita saw the long lines of ancestors, she realized that the ancestors are always right here. Today, through DNA testing, you can discover those with whom you share the same genes. When one of my students was diagnosed with breast cancer, She underwent genetic counseling. During her counseling session, she was guided through her DNA family tree, which included relatives that had been estranged from her for decades. You know, she said, there they were, all in the room with me. I realized that you can disown people, but you cannot kick them out of the net. Genetic lineages are one thing, but tell me, whom do you see that you do not recognize as yourself? Is it a family member that you no longer speak to? Is it the homeless woman living in the tent outside your house? The young child separated from his parents at the border? The gang member with tattoos across his forehead? And how about entire societies and cultures against which systemic discrimination is practiced? Tell me, what is the gap that needs to be closed? And here are the questions posed by the authors of the book, these teachers. When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Where are the ancestors right now? What are you leaving for others as your spiritual inheritance? These everyday koans we can treat in the same way we might treat Lectio Divina. For example, when you read them more than once and you listen first for just the rhythm of the words, then you can read them again, paying attention to what are the images or the phrases that are catching your attention. And then you read them a third time and invite them to sit with you and teach you and awaken you and invite you to ask your own questions. So, with this reading of the Householder Koans, and with these questions and reflections from the authors, I'll invite you to consider and share something that this story woke up in you. Maybe like those little taps on the shoulder. What was the phrase or image that stuck with you or struck you? What was a question or story that reminded you of you? What do you think about these final questions? Thank you.